The bill enables the referendum that the government seeks to hold on the future of the MMP system. So I think it's obvious from the speeches on this side of the House already that Labor regards a referendum as premature. We've only had 5 MMP elections. And so there's significant evidence that the electorate is honing its skills to use MMP to find and achieve the sort of outcomes that it actually wants. The so-called wasted vote, the vote that goes to those parties that don't achieve the 5% threshold or otherwise have their votes counted under the system, got down to as far as 1.3% in 2005. And the process of starting to reduce the number of political parties represented in this House was begun in earnest by the people at the last election. And looking at the trends, Colin James has predicted that by 2014 there's probably going to be 4, at the most 5 parties represented in this House if trends continue. So people are working out how most effectively to use MMP, and our view would be, sir, that they should be allowed to continue to do that for some time before we look at potentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater. As other speakers have said, sir, moving to MMP was a good thing. Chris Tremaine's just reflected on the anomalies that were produced by the former electoral system. He mentioned the social credit position when they received a large chunk of the votes and only, I think, 2 members on one occasion. And under FPP between 1935 and 1993, the National Party scored a higher ratio of seats to votes than Labor, and in 1978 and 81, of course, won office with fewer numbers of the popular vote than the Labor Party. That's just unfair on any measure. And as Materius Ture said in their contribution, since the introduction of MMP, we've seen the House become much more diverse. Pete Hodgson made that observation as well. And the entry of smaller parties has ensured that the views of the electorate are better represented in this House, that the views expressed in speeches and questions and otherwise are less monolithic. So I'm not saying that MMP is perfect or that a small number of sensible changes should not be made so as to increase its fairness and its effectiveness. Leanne Dalzell spoke about some of the potential changes. One is to eliminate the waiver, under which a party which wins one electorate seat does not need to get 5% of the party vote for proportionality. Without the waiver, ACT would now have 1 seat, not 5. Winston Peters would have been a lone MP in 1999. And there are other possibly desirable changes to the system, sir, around the threshold, around the proportionality of electorate versus list seats, although personally I'm less convinced on those questions. So, Mr Speaker, although we take the view on this side of the House that I've outlined, we will support sending the legislation to a select committee. But there is one important question that select committee will have to consider, sir. There is another bill that will deal with the future electoral finance rules around third-party advertising. And the point at which that bill and this one coincide, and at which serious questions are raised, is the decision to hold an electoral referendum at the same time as a general election. Because, sir, interest groups will be able to run parallel campaigns, advertising in both the election campaign and the referendum campaign. Now, sir, if they have to spend more than $12,000, if they intend to do that, they will have to register. But registration is the proposed limitation at which all issues as far as the state is concerned would end. From that point on, people or groups can spend what they like. Now, sir, the Minister said that the registration rules that I've just described actually go further than the advertising restrictions placed on the 1992, 1993 and 1997 referenda, where there was no cap on spending, and indeed at that point not even a need to register with the Electoral Commission. All that was then needed was a promoter statement. But, sir, as Leanne Dalzell pointed out, that was before the exclusive brethren showed what unlimited spending could deliver. It is important that all members of the House not underestimate the enduring fear and disquiet that the conduct of the Brethren and others when they sought to subvert our electoral laws caused. And Mr Henare might think it's not a matter for concern. He thinks it might be something we shouldn't concern ourselves with. But members on this side of the House are always concerned when anybody tries to buy our electoral system. It should never be something that we should permit. And any member who thinks to the contrary is not participating in this debate in good faith. And Mr Henare's interjections just remind us that what the Brethren did was done in cooperation with his political party, and that is not something that is easily forgotten on this side of the House. The conduct that I'm talking about, sir, cooperated in by the National Party, did enduring damage, and if it is to be repaired, the need for appropriate continuing transparency in our electoral law needs to be properly respected. Mr Speaker, in the United States there is a constitutional guarantee of freedom of expression. It's found primarily in the First Amendment to the Constitution. But even in the United States, that temple to free expression, it is recognised that there is a public interest in limiting the amounts that wealthy individuals or groups can spend to disproportionately influence the result of elections, and that the guarantees contained in the First Amendment are not absolute. And sir, it's been interesting this year to watch, in particular, the struggles that have occurred on this question. There have been these struggles since the 1970s when Congress and the President first started to attempt to regulate campaign finance. But the latest developments have included the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, commonly known as the McCain-Feingold legislation. Now, finally, it was thought at that point, when that legislation was signed into law by the second President Bush in 2002, that a bipartisan and satisfactory compromise had been reached on the question of campaign finance. Well, sir, unfortunately, that ignores the regrettable and ultimate success of attempts over many years to stack the United States Supreme Court with extreme right-wing jurists from one particular philosophical direction. Because earlier this year, significant parts of McCain-Feingold were struck down. And that decision, it's the Citizens United versus the Federal Electoral Commission, is widely reviled, sir. It's been rejected by commentators, learned academics, but also some 80% of Americans who think it's wrong, because they know that what it's going to do is lead to an avalanche of soft money from wealthy corporate interests to skew the midterm election results due in November. People who want to see the United States make good progress on legislation, for example, to allow them to impose emissions limits on their greenhouse gases, know that this decision striking down the soft money parts of McCain-Feingold are going to make that prospect much, much more remote. And sir, there is a clear analogy with the parallel campaigning loophole that appears in this bill. We all know in this House that big business in New Zealand doesn't like MMP and would like to see the back of it, because it doesn't allow for the imposition of its will, as the previous system and many alternatives did. And many have assumed that this dislike is what lies behind the National Party's decision to promote this referendum, which is why so many of us have been impressed by the way that the Minister has nonetheless largely managed to come up with what looks like a fair process. But we should all be concerned, sir, that the Minister appears on this issue to have been forced to sacrifice true and complete transparency on the participants in the referendum process by allowing for parallel campaigning and failing to provide for spending caps. And sir, I want to end by just being very clear. The interests of democracy require us to remedy this defect as the bill proceeds. If it's not fixed, this bill will fail to retain the widespread support across the House that good electoral reform needs to attract.